Brattleboro, Vermont, a quiet town tucked between snowy hills and thick green forests, where tragedy feels like something reserved for paperback novels, not real life. But before blood stained the white sheets of room 308 at St. Mary's Hospital, the town only knew Nathan and Emily Cartwright as the perfect couple. The kind of people folks around here said would make it to the rocking chair years. That's what Pastor Brennan called them the day he married them in front of God and half the town. Nathan was the kind of man people described as steady. He was a mechanical engineer, a 9-to-5 man who clocked in, clocked out, came home, ate dinner with his wife, and read scripture before bed. He was tall, clean-cut, quiet, and intensely private. The kind of man who didn't smile often, but when he did, you felt like you earned it. Emily was his opposite in all the right ways. A pre-K teacher at the local elementary school, she had the kind of laugh that made children calm down and adults soften. She wore her blonde hair in loose waves and always smelled like lavender and fresh laundry. She baked cookies for the fire department, kept a garden full of sunflowers, and remembered the names of everyone's dogs. When she walked hand in hand with Nathan to Sunday service, they looked like a Norman Rockwell painting come alive. They'd been married for 6 years. No scandals, no drama, just clean living and Bible study and the white picket fence life. They own a modest 2-story colonial on Pine Street, painted soft white with navy shutters. There was a spare room on the second floor, the baby's room, they used to call it, though it had been collecting dust for years. The problem was they couldn't have kids. Emily had tried everything: charting ovulation, fertility diets, acupuncture, prayer circles. But month after month, the pregnancy test came back negative. She didn't cry in front of Nathan. She didn't have to. He could see it, the way she stared at baby shoes in the department store, how she lingered at church when someone brought a newborn. Nathan never blamed her, never raised his voice, never even looked disappointed. But something hardened in him. She could feel it, quiet and cold, like winter creeping in through a cracked window. Then, one autumn evening, Emily sat on the edge of their clawfoot tub, hands trembling as she stared at 2 bold pink lines on a test strip. Pregnant. When she told Nathan, he didn't jump or yell or cry, but his hand shook when he touched her stomach. "Thank God," he whispered. Finally, the news spread through town in less than 2 days. The church held a special prayer for the Cartwrights. Emily's students made a giant card full of crayon hearts and backward letters. It felt like a miracle, like something had shifted in the world and shifted right. But something in Nathan began to change. Slowly at first. He became more watchful, more precise. He asked to go with her to all the appointments. Insisted they switch to a different hospital, St. Mary's, 40 miles out of town. Better doctors, he said. But Emily sensed it was something else. Something in his eyes. Something that felt less like excitement and more like suspicion. Emily became quieter. She stopped humming lullabies while folding onesies. Stopped writing in her journal every night. Her colleagues noticed. Her sister noticed. Even the mailman noticed. She said it was just hormones, but there were nights when she sat alone in the nursery, hands on her belly, eyes glassy with something that looked like guilt. Then came the snow. At 39 weeks, the doctor told her the baby was coming early. Nathan drove her to the hospital in his old pickup truck. He barely said a word on the ride. When the nurse asked him, "Are you nervous?" he said, "I'll have my answer soon enough." At 3:47 p.m., the baby was born, 7 pounds, 6 ounces. Healthy, strong, screaming. And then the room went silent. The nurse wiped the baby clean and brought him to Emily. But something was wrong. The baby's skin was brown. Not olive, not ruddy brown. His hair was dark and tightly curled. His nose wide. His lips full. Emily froze. Her arms trembled. Nathan stared, not in shock, but in confirmation, as if he'd been waiting for this moment all along. He turned and walked out of the room. No shouting, no accusations, no fists through walls. Just a quiet exit, a storm brewing in his bones. Emily knew. In that split second, she knew what was coming. But what no one could have imagined, not the doctors, not the nurses, not even Emily, was that within 10 minutes, Nathan would walk back into that room and end her life with his bare hands. In the town of Brattleboro, the town that once called him the perfect husband, the faithful man of God, would wake up the next morning to the headline: Husband kills wife after she gives birth to black baby. Because in Nathan Cartwright's world, betrayal didn't just deserve pain. It deserved death. Emily Cartwright had always imagined that when the moment finally came, when she held her baby for the first time, she would cry. She thought she'd feel a rush of love, a surge of something holy and eternal, like God himself had breathed through her and made her whole. Instead, when the nurse gently placed the newborn on her chest, all she felt was cold. Not the cold of the room, not the sweat drying on her skin, but a kind of spiritual cold, a chill that settled deep into her bones. The baby was beautiful, perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, bright eyes already searching for something. But his skin, the color was unmistakable. Brown, not pale or ruddy like hers or Nathan's, but warm and deep like sun-baked earth. His hair was soft and black, curling tightly at the crown. Even the nurses, trained to show no reaction, shared a look. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She tried to smile, to say something, anything, but her lips wouldn't move. Across the room, Nathan stood frozen. He didn't blink, didn't take a step forward. He looked like a man watching his house burn down and realizing he was the one who lit the match. For a long moment, no one said a word. Then Nathan spoke, quietly, steadily. "Whose baby is that?" The nurse looked horrified. "Sir, please." He turned to Emily. "Whose baby is that, Emily?" She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her body was trembling now, not from the pain of birth, but from the weight of truth pressing down on her chest. I can explain," she whispered. Nathan didn't yell. He didn't cry or throw things. He simply stared at her like she was something rotten he'd found in his kitchen. Then he turned and walked out of the room. The door closed behind him with a soft click. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Emily lay there, the baby still on her chest, her arms limp at her sides. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. She just stared at the ceiling, counting the white tiles, breathing in short, shallow gasps. She had known this day might come. She had prayed it wouldn't. She had begged God to let the child be pale, to let Nathan never suspect. But genetics didn't care about prayer. Biology didn't bend for guilt. One mistake, one night, that's all it had taken. His name was Marcus Baines, a fellow teacher at the elementary school. He'd started working there 2 years ago, charming, funny, passionate about helping troubled kids. They'd become friends over after-school lesson plans and late-night email chains about how to help little Jamal stop biting other students. Emily had never cheated before, never even thought about it. But that one night, Nathan had been away at a 3-day men's retreat with the church. Emily had been lonely, frustrated, and Marcus had shown up with Thai food and a bottle of wine and that damn smile. She told herself it was a one-time thing, that it meant nothing. She went to church the next morning, knelt at the altar, and cried so hard her makeup bled into her mask. She swore she'd never tell a soul, and she didn't, until now. Now her secret was in her arms, breathing, blinking, innocent. One of the nurses finally broke the silence. "Do you want me to take him to the nursery for a bit?" Emily nodded slowly. She couldn't bring herself to answer out loud. The baby was lifted from her chest, wrapped tighter, and wheeled away. She watched him go through the glass window. She wanted to scream. She wanted to beg someone to reverse time. But mostly, she wanted to see Nathan again, to explain, to apologize, to fall at his feet, and make him see that, yes, she had failed him, but she was still the woman he married. When the door opened again, she thought it was him. But it was only the nurse with ice water. "Your husband," the nurse said quietly, setting the cup down on the side table. He looked upset. "Is everything okay?" Emily gave her a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "He just needs time." But time was not on her side. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. No word. Emily started to drift into a hazy sleep, her body exhausted from labor, from panic, from dread. But something jolted her upright. A sound. Footsteps. Firm. Heavy. Purposeful. The door creaked open again. Nathan. His face was pale, his hands clenched into fists. His eyes weren't red or teary, they were sharp. Icy. Emily sat up. "Nathan, please. I didn't mean to." He raised one hand, and she stopped talking. "You knew this baby wasn't mine," he said. She nodded slowly. "You knew this for months. And you said nothing." "I was scared," she whispered. "I was going to tell you. I thought maybe it wouldn't show." He let out a dry laugh. "Didn't show, huh?" "Nathan, please." She reached for his hand. He didn't move. "I gave you everything," he said, voice shaking now. "I waited 6 years. I prayed. I stayed loyal. I carried your shame like it was mine. And this is what you give me." Tears streamed down her face. "I'm sorry." He took a slow step forward. "You think sorry changes what people are going to say when they see him?" "I didn't mean to hurt you. I was lonely." Nathan's jaw tightened. "You let another man touch you, and then you carried his child into my house like it was a gift from God." Emily shook her head. "I never wanted to replace you. I still love you. Please, don't let hate win. Not now." And for a moment, just a moment, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Sadness. Confusion. But it was gone in a blink. Nathan turned and walked out the door again, closing it behind him. Emily collapsed back onto the bed, sobbing silently into her hospital gown. She didn't know it then, but that was the last time she would ever speak. 7 minutes later, he would return with something darker than betrayal in his heart, something far worse than pain. He would return to room 308 not as a husband, not as a father, but as a man who believed his world had been violated, his name, his bloodline, his pride. And in his mind, there was only one way to reclaim it. Not with forgiveness, not with prayer, but with murder. Room 308 was silent except for the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor and the quiet humming of the air vent overhead. Emily lay still, half asleep, half awake, drifting in that strange haze between childbirth and something heavier. She was sore, weak, emotionally wrecked, and desperately hoping Nathan would come back. Calmer, ready to talk, ready to scream, even but talk. She kept hearing echoes of her own voice. "I still love you. Please, don't let hate win." She thought maybe he was gone for good. Maybe he needed space. Maybe he'd driven home to smash something or to call his brother and cry. But Nathan hadn't gone home. He had gone to the supply closet down the hall. Surveillance footage would later show him standing still in front of the mop sink for nearly 3 minutes, staring into space. His face was blank. His fingers tapped slowly on his thigh. Then, as if something clicked into place, he reached up, took one of the heavy-duty 4 lines hanging from a stainless steel hook, and calmly walked back down the hallway. He passed 2 nurses, nodded at one. No one stopped him. He was a husband. He had a right to be there. Back in room 308, Emily was startled by the sound of the door opening again. She turned her head and saw him, Nathan, standing in the doorway, holding something in his hand. His face was calm now. Too calm. She tried to sit up. "Nathan." He said nothing, just walked toward her, slow and measured, the way a butcher walks when the animal has stopped struggling. She didn't see the 4 tube until he was right beside her bed. "Please, she said, her voice cracking. "We can fix this. We can still. I gave you everything," he murmured. "And you let me be a fool in front of this whole damn town. Nathan, he's just a baby. He didn't ask for this." "But I did," he said. "I asked for a child. My child." He leaned forward, and Emily finally screamed. Not for herself, but for someone, anyone, to come through that door. For mercy. For God. But no one came in time. He looped the forecord around her neck in one swift motion. "Pull tight," Emily thrashed, her legs kicking under the thin hospital blanket, her hands grabbing at his arms. Her fingernails dug into his skin. She tried to say his name, to plead with him, but the words caught in her throat. Her eyes locked with his. He didn't blink. The monitor beside her began to beep erratically. A nurse named Clarissa, 2 doors down, heard the sound. She didn't panic at first. Sometimes new mothers had panic attacks. It happened, but something didn't sit right. The monitor spike, the scream. She rushed down the hallway and flung the door open. What she saw stopped her in her tracks. Emily's face was turning blue. Nathan was still on top of her, the cord tight in his fists, the blanket twisted around them like a shroud. "Sir, stop! Get off her!" Clarissa shouted. He didn't move. His eyes were glassy, lost in something that wasn't grief but cold, mechanical rage. Clarissa hit the emergency button on the wall. A loud buzzer went off throughout the maternity ward. Footsteps thundered down the hallway. By the time 2 orderlies and a security guard burst in, it was over. Nathan was still holding the cord. Emily's body had gone still. Her arms were slack at her sides. Her mouth was open, but no sound came out. One of the orderlies tackled Nathan to the floor. Another tried CPR, then the defibrillator, but it was too late. Emily Cartwright was pronounced dead at 4:38 p.m. She had given birth to her first child at 3:47. 51 minutes later, she was murdered by the man she called her husband. The hospital erupted in chaos. The maternity ward was locked down. All visitors were temporarily barred. News vans started showing up before sunset. Nathan was arrested on the spot, wrists cuffed behind his back with dry blood from where Emily had scratched him. As officers walked him down the hallway, a nurse yelled, "You're a monster!" He didn't even flinch. When questioned by police just an hour later, Nathan spoke without hesitation. "She lied," he said. "She lied to me, to God, to this whole town." Detective Laura Morrison, leading the interview, asked him why he hadn't just walked away. Nathan shrugged. "Because people needed to see what happens when you destroy a man's life like that. Actions have consequences, even for your own wife. She stopped being my wife the moment that baby opened his eyes." He refused a lawyer, refused bail, asked for a Bible and silence. Meanwhile, hospital staff were traumatized. Some nurses took leave. Others went to counseling. A grief counselor was brought in for patience. But nothing could erase the sight of a woman being killed where she should have been safest, surrounded by life, not death. The infant, now a motherless newborn, was placed in temporary hospital custody. Emily's parents were called. Her mother collapsed when she heard the news. Her father tried to fight a state trooper outside the hospital. "I told her," he shouted. "I told her something wasn't right about that boy." Emily's sister, Meredith, arrived within hours and demanded to see the child. She held the baby, still unnamed, and wept over him like he was her own. In the following days, the town of Brattleboro went from shock to fury. This was no longer a domestic tragedy. It was a national story. A white man had murdered his white wife because their child was black. The racial implications were impossible to ignore. Twitter exploded. Headlines ran coast to coast. Vermont husband kills wife after interracial affair exposed during childbirth. Murder in the maternity ward. A story of betrayal, race, and revenge. Honor killing or hate crime. Nation divided over Cartwright case. Talk shows debated it. Pastors denounced it. Extremists praised it. And in the center of it all was a child, just hours old, who had already become the living proof of his mother's final mistake and his father's final judgment. The baby was given the temporary name Baby Boy Cartwright and placed in estate care. Meredith began the process of filing for custody. When a forensic pathologist examined Emily's body, they found no signs of pre-existing medical issues. Her cause of death was officially listed as manual strangulation with ligature compression. She had fought back. Hard. But she had just delivered a child. Her body wasn't ready to survive another battle. The state issued a gag order on certain details, including the identity of the biological father, though internally, investigators were already tracking down Marcus Baines. And through all of it, Nathan Cartwright sat alone in a county jail cell. He didn't cry, didn't scream. He told his public defender that he was ready to plead guilty if it meant they'd stop twisting the story. But the story was already out of his hands. The world had seen what he'd done, and they would never forget. Emily Cartwright had died with her eyes open. That fact haunted everyone who'd seen her body that day, especially Clarissa, the nurse who found her. In the days following the murder, Clarissa kept reliving that image. Emily's face frozen in a mix of horror and heartbreak, her mouth slightly open as if her final word had been caught in her throat. Detectives assigned to the case quickly realized that the killing, while shocking in its brutality, wasn't a crime of random passion. It had the sharp edges of something long simmering, something premeditated. Detective Laura Morrison, who had interrogated Nathan, went straight to Emily's home after the crime scene of the hospital was secured. What she found inside the white colonial house on Pine Street wasn't the home of a happy couple. It was a shrine to quiet tension. The nursery upstairs was freshly painted. Pale yellow walls, tiny hand-painted clouds along the trim, and a white rocking chair that looked like it had barely been used. On the dresser was a single pair of baby socks, folded neatly. The crib still had its tag on, but in the bedroom, there were signs of something else. Nathan's nightstand had a stack of religious devotionals, all centered around family purity, obedience, and betrayal. One passage was highlighted in 3 different books. The sins of the wife shall not be covered by the righteousness of her husband. Emily's side of the bed had a spiral-bound notebook shoved under the mattress. It was her journal, and it told a story no one in Brattleboro was ready to hear. The first few pages were what you'd expect from a woman desperate to conceive. Entries filled with prayers, fertility chart tracking, and hope. But then about 9 months before the birth, the tone shifted. In a single shaky entry dated November 14th, Emily had written, "I made a mistake. A terrible one. I keep seeing his face when I close my eyes. I only wanted to feel wanted. Nathan hasn't touched me in weeks. He prays harder, but he's drifting away from me. And then Marcus, he made me laugh again. God, what have I done?" Detective Morrison flipped forward. More entries. Shame, guilt, denial, fear. Emily hadn't seen Marcus Baines again after that night. She had told herself it didn't mean anything. She had begged God to let her go on with her marriage without consequences. Then she missed her period. The next entries were frantic. It can't be his. Please, God, let it not be. I'll do everything right. I'll be a good wife. I'll never look at another man again. Just don't let this be the punishment. When the positive pregnancy test came, Emily wrote a single line. "I am cursed." Detective Morrison leaned back in the chair, stunned. Emily had carried this weight for 9 months, smiling through it all, trying to hold her life together with trembling hands. And now she was dead, by the hand of a man who had likely known more than he let on. They pulled Nathan's cell phone records next. 3 months before the birth, Nathan had hired a private investigator based out of Montpelier. Payments were made in cash. The PI, when questioned, admitted that Nathan had asked him to keep an eye on his wife while he was out of town. He never caught her with Marcus. They never met again, but the man confirmed that Nathan had seen photos of Marcus and Emily walking out of the school building together late at night, laughing. Didn't look romantic, the PI said, but he looked at those photos like they were a knife to the gut. The case was now undeniably more complex. This wasn't just about a man being blindsided by betrayal. Nathan had suspected. He'd obsessed. He'd built a narrative of infidelity in his head and watched it unfold day by day until the truth quite literally came screaming into the world in a delivery room. The final piece came when detectives interviewed Marcus Baines. He had moved to Connecticut 6 months prior, after a contract dispute with the school board. When they knocked on his door, Marcus looked shocked, not by the news of the baby, but by the name they said next. Emily's dead. He sat down on his porch steps, hands shaking. No, he said over and over. No, no, no. Detective Morrison explained the timeline. The birth, the murder, the child's appearance. Marcus didn't deny the affair. He didn't try to rationalize it or make excuses. She was lonely, he said quietly. That's all it was. She just needed someone to listen. We were both drinking. It was stupid. It was a mistake. But she didn't deserve that. Then he asked to see the baby. They explained that the child was in temporary state care until custody could be arranged. Marcus looked crushed. That's my son, he said. I didn't even know he existed until this minute. And he's already got no mother. In the following days, blood samples were collected. The DNA results confirmed it. Marcus Baines was the biological father. This information, sealed from public view by the court, only fueled the prosecution's theory of premeditation. Nathan hadn't snapped. He had stewed. He had watched Emily's belly grow, knowing, deep down, that the child wasn't his. He had smiled for baby shower photos, rubbed her feet, prayed with her, all while quietly deciding that if the baby came out black, there would be no forgiveness. The murder wasn't an accident. It was prophecy, self-fulfilled, scripted. The town of Brattleboro, which once saw the Cartwrights as the wholesome couple next door, now struggled to process the layers of betrayal and violence. The church community tried to stay silent, but cracks formed. Some members whispered that Emily brought this on herself. Others condemned them for even thinking that way. In private, Meredith, Emily's sister, started preparing legal paperwork to adopt the baby. She named him Elijah. He had Emily's eyes, the same soft curve to his cheeks. And when he smiled, it was like her voice filled the room again. But even as a baby, Elijah had already inherited more than he ever asked for. He was the product of one night, one secret, and one decision that tore a family and a town apart. And now, his very existence was a reminder of a truth that people like Nathan Cartwright spent their whole lives trying to suppress. Some secrets don't stay buried, and when they surface, they don't just ruin reputations. They destroy lives. The nation didn't wait for the trial. By the time Nathan Cartwright was formally indicted for first-degree murder, the public had already split itself into two angry, uncompromising camps. Those who saw him as a broken man pushed past the brink, and those who saw him for exactly what he was, a killer fueled not just by betrayal, but by deep-seated racial rage. The phrase that took off first came from a retired judge interviewed on a morning news segment. This was an old-fashioned honor killing in modern dress. It caught fire. Talk show hosts, podcasts, right-wing influencers, and social media pundits latched onto the term, framing Nathan's crime as a tragic but understandable response to infidelity and humiliation. They painted him as a man who had been emasculated, lied to, and publicly shamed, and who'd simply snapped in the face of unbearable truth. She cheated. She lied. She bore another man's child. He didn't kill her because she was white and the baby was black. He killed her because she broke the sacred bond of trust, said one radio host in Dallas, his phone lines lighting up for hours. But others saw right through it. It's 2025, said activist and author DeRay Jenkins on CNN. Let's call this what it is, a racially charged execution. The moment that baby came out with brown skin, Nathan Cartwright didn't just see betrayal. He saw contamination. Emily's sister Meredith, already overwhelmed with grief and the sudden role of guardian to baby Elijah, did a brief interview with Good Morning America. Her voice shook, but her message was clear. My sister wasn't perfect, she said, but she didn't deserve to be strangled to death by the man she trusted the most. And Elijah, he didn't ask to be born, but now he'll grow up without a mother, and all the world will see is a scandal when they look at him. That's not justice. That's trauma. In Brattleboro, Vermont, things got ugly. Churchgoers who once sang alongside Emily now debated her morality in whispers. Some of them said they still loved her, but she did sin. Others stopped bringing it up at all, avoiding eye contact with Meredith at the grocery store, at church, at the pharmacy. Anonymous letters were mailed to her home. Some were supportive. Others told her to go back to wherever she got that baby from. One simply read, "Don't raise a lie like it's truth." Outside the courthouse on the day of Nathan's arraignment, two groups faced off across police barricades. On one side, protesters holding signs that read "Justice for Emily," "Black Lives Begin at Birth," and "She was a woman, not property." On the other, small clusters of local men, many wearing camo jackets and trucker hats, with signs saying, "He snapped. You would too," and "Protect fathers, not infidelity." Inside the courtroom, Nathan was calm, unreadable. He wore a simple beige prison jumpsuit. His hands remained folded in his lap throughout the proceeding, his eyes fixed straight ahead. He pled not guilty, though the public defender representing him hinted that they may pursue a diminished capacity defense. Detective Laura Morrison, who had led the investigation, sat just a few rows behind the prosecution table. She hadn't said much to reporters since the arrest, but she was known inside the department as being blunt and unsparing. "He didn't kill in a moment of rage," she told the DA behind closed doors. "He walked down a hallway, found a cord, came back, and choked the life out of a woman still bleeding from childbirth. You don't do that unless you've already decided someone doesn't deserve to live." One of the most chilling pieces of evidence came from a text message Nathan sent to his brother 5 days before the birth. It simply read, "If it's not mine, I don't know what I'll do. But I won't raise another man's legacy." The defense team worked hard to suppress that message from being admitted in court. They failed. The prosecution leaned into it. They painted a portrait of a man obsessed, not just with paternity, but with purity, with ownership, with a legacy of his name, his bloodline, his place in a small white town where difference was still a whisper, not a conversation. They found old forum posts Nathan had written under anonymous usernames on men's rights and traditional values websites. Posts filled with thinly veiled contempt for interracial families, single mothers, and cucks, as he often called them. One particularly damning comment, written just 6 months before the murder: "If my wife ever brought home a baby that wasn't mine, she wouldn't live to regret it." That's not hate. That's honor. The defense tried to frame the murder as the breakdown of a man under immense emotional stress, a snap caused by psychological trauma, religious pressure, and marital collapse. They brought in a psychologist who described Nathan as deeply wounded by perceived betrayal, raised in a household where the male identity was tied to control, stability, and bloodline. But the prosecution had their own expert who said, coldly, this was not a man who broke. This was a man who executed. Nathan Cartwright didn't lose control. He took it. Meredith attended every court date. She sat in the front row, always holding a small crocheted blanket Emily had made while pregnant, yellow and blue, with stars stitched into the corners. On the final day of the pre-trial hearing, she stood outside the courthouse and addressed the cameras with Elijah in her arms. "My sister made a mistake," she said, voice steady. "But she carried that child, protected him, and planned to raise him with love. Nathan took that from her. He took her future, my future, and Elijah's mother away forever. If you think that's honor, then maybe you need to look at what kind of man you really are." The country kept watching. News cycles came and went. Mass shootings, political scandals, celebrity breakups. But the Cartwright story lingered. It was too raw, too personal. It touched on everything America tried to deny it still struggled with: race, marriage, masculinity, control, forgiveness, and the ugly, unspoken fear of being replaced. And in the middle of it all, still waiting for justice, was a child. A boy who hadn't even reached his first month of life, whose entire existence had become a debate, a symbol, a controversy. But to Meredith, he was just Elijah, a baby who cooed when he heard music, who loved warm baths, who reached for the stars stitched into the corners of his mother's last gift to him. And somewhere behind thick county jail walls, Nathan Cartwright sat alone, still convinced, even now, that he was the one who'd been wronged. Brattleboro had always been a quiet town, one of those postcard places where folks left their doors unlocked, and everybody knew what kind of pie you brought to the church potluck. But after Emily Cartwright's murder, something unspoken cracked open beneath the surface, and the town that once prided itself on unity found itself breaking in two. There was no middle ground anymore. At first, the townspeople tried to grieve together. The church held a candlelight vigil for Emily a week after her funeral. Pastor Brennan spoke softly beneath the cross, calling for compassion, forgiveness, healing. But the crowd was stiff. Faces were unreadable. Some people cried. Others kept their arms crossed tight across their chests. A few didn't show up at all. Behind the stained glass windows, whispers turned to arguments. "I don't condone what he did, but I understand why he snapped," said Pete Halvorson, a local hardware store owner who'd gone to school with Nathan. "You think you know someone, and then they lie to your face? For 9 months. Are you hearing yourself?" snapped his wife, Carla. "She just gave birth. She was still bleeding when he killed her. That wasn't snapping. That was pure, calculated hate." People stopped making eye contact at the gas station, at the diner, at the grocery store. Someone left a Bible with a highlighted verse on Meredith's porch: "Thou shalt not commit adultery." The next day, someone else left a note in the same spot: "Thou shalt not murder." Lines were drawn not just around beliefs, but around grief itself. Some saw Emily as a sinner who'd paid the price. Others saw her as a victim whose only crime was believing she'd still be loved after falling from grace. Meanwhile, the Cartwright house on Pine Street sat empty and cold. Its shutters closed, the lawn uncut. Locals said it felt like a haunted house now, not from ghosts, but from the weight of what had happened there. Meredith refused to leave town. She moved into her sister's house with baby Elijah and tried to hold her head high. But it wasn't easy. She got stared at in the produce aisle. A cashier once accidentally forgot to ring up her change. Another woman at the post office said, loud enough for her to hear, "It's just sad. That baby's a reminder of everything wrong with the world." Meredith spun around. "No," she said. "He's a reminder of what happens when people believe some lives matter more than others." Word traveled fast after that. The next Sunday, only half the congregation showed up for church. Pastor Brennan addressed the elephant in the pews. "I've known Nathan since he was a boy," he said, standing before the altar, voice trembling. "And I can say without a doubt, this is not the man I baptized. But I've also known Emily. She was not perfect, but she was kind. She loved. She hoped. and no one, deserves to die for their imperfections. Still, some walked out during his sermon. The town wasn't just mourning anymore. It was picking sides. News crews returned to cover the divided town story. They interviewed locals outside grocery stores, diners, and town hall meetings. Some interviews went viral. "I just think it's unfair," said one woman, tears brimming. "We all make mistakes, but only some of us get crucified for them, and only some of us get excused." "I'm not saying what he did was right," said a retired police officer, "but men get pushed too far. You don't know what it's like to raise a kid you know ain't yours." Marcus Baines watched it all unfold from his apartment in Connecticut. He had kept quiet since the confirmation that he was Elijah's father. Not because he didn't care, but because he knew how dangerous attention could be for him, for the child, for Meredith. But when he saw a viral clip of a protester holding a sign that said, "Keep Brattleboro pure," something in him snapped. He agreed to do one interview. PBS. No sensationalism. No shouting matches. Just facts. In the studio, under soft lighting, he spoke with calm intensity. "I knew Emily for 1 year," he said. "We were co-workers. Friends. One night, we crossed a line. I'm not proud of it. But I never forced her. I never hurt her. I didn't even know she was pregnant. And now she's dead. And our son is being judged by the color of his skin before he can walk." The interviewer asked if he planned to fight for custody. Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "I don't want to take him from Meredith. She's doing everything she can. But I need him to know I'm here, that I exist, that I didn't abandon him." Back in Vermont, Meredith watched the interview with Elijah asleep on her chest. She cried silently, not because she was angry, but because it was the first time someone spoke the truth on camera without trying to defend anything. Just grief, just love, just human. The next day, she called Marcus. They talked for an hour. They made a plan, joint guardianship eventually, but first stability, first safety, first healing. As the trial date approached, Brattleboro grew quieter. Not peaceful, just quieter, like a town holding its breath before a storm. Local businesses took down their political signs. The church stopped doing public prayer circles. Even the protest signs began to fade away. But no one forgot. Nathan Cartwright remained in county jail awaiting trial. He stopped giving interviews. His lawyer, a thin, balding man with nervous eyes, began preparing for a national media circus. In a recorded phone call to his older brother, Nathan said, "They can throw me in prison forever, but at least the lie didn't get to live." When Meredith heard that quote later in court, she didn't flinch, because she'd already heard the truth from someone far louder than Nathan could ever be. She heard it in Elijah's laugh. She heard in the way he kicked his legs when music played, in the way he reached for the stars stitched into the baby blanket Emily made with her own hands. The town of Brattleboro was divided, yes, but for Meredith, and for Elijah, and for the truth left behind by a woman who dared to hope she could be loved despite her mistake, there was only one side worth standing on. The side where no one had to die to be forgiven. The side where love didn't have to come with conditions. The trial began on a rainy Monday morning in October. The courthouse in Windham County was flanked by soaked umbrellas, news vans, and silent protesters huddled behind yellow barricades. Inside, a dozen cameras weren't allowed, but the air was thick with tension that no lens could ever capture. Nathan Cartwright entered the courtroom in a standard orange jumpsuit, his beard now grayer than it had been 6 months ago, his eyes sunken. He didn't glance toward the gallery, where Meredith sat holding Elijah in her arms. He didn't look at the judge. He didn't even flinch when the prosecutor read out the charges. First-degree murder, aggravated domestic homicide, committing homicide in the presence of a child. He pled not guilty. His lawyer, David LeMay, leaned into the microphone and told the court that the defense would pursue what he called an emotional duress argument. Nathan, he claimed, had suffered a psychological break, triggered by an extreme betrayal and the sudden discovery that his entire marriage was built on lies. But the prosecution had come armed. Their lead, Assistant District Attorney Valeria Torres, began with a simple image: the nursery. She described the yellow-painted walls, the untouched crib, and the name Noah written in soft calligraphy on a shelf. This was a room meant for a future, she said. But instead, it became a ghost story. She presented the surveillance footage next. Nathan walking calmly down the hallway, holding an 4-tube in one hand. She paused the video, let the image linger. Then, she showed the moment he entered room 308. No audio, just movement. Emily's face slowly turning from hope to horror. Some jurors looked away. Meredith couldn't. She promised herself she wouldn't cry, not in front of him. And she didn't. She held Elijah a little tighter instead. The prosecution's star witness was Clarissa Hall, the nurse who found Emily that day. Her voice trembled as she testified. When I walked in, he was still on top of her. She wasn't fighting anymore. Her eyes were wide open. The defense cross-examined her gently, trying to suggest maybe Nathan didn't know what he was doing. Maybe he was in a dissociative state. Maybe grief had overrun his mind. Clarissa didn't blink. I worked trauma cases, panic attacks, postpartum psychosis. What I saw in that man's eyes wasn't confusion. It was decision. Then came the digital evidence. Nathan's text to his brother, the highlighted Bible passages, the forum posts. The prosecution showed one post dated 3 weeks before Emily's due date. The username was Restoring Order VT. If you can't trust your wife's womb, you don't have a wife. You have a betrayal in a dress. The courtroom was silent when the post was read aloud. Even the judge seemed to take an extra beat before calling for recess. During the break, Meredith stepped into the hallway for air. She wasn't alone. A woman she didn't recognize approached her, mid-40s, tired eyes, soft voice. I just wanted to say, I used to think Nathan was justified, but then I saw your nephew in your arms, and I realized there's nothing honorable about leaving a baby motherless. Meredith nodded. She didn't say thank you. She didn't have the energy for grace that day. The defense began their case the following week. They called a psychiatrist, Dr. Alan Keene, who diagnosed Nathan with acute stress disorder triggered by unexpected paternity shock. He claimed Nathan had entered a dissociative state when he realized the baby wasn't biologically his. He was raised in a home where fatherhood and bloodline were sacred, Dr. Keene explained. For someone like Nathan, this was not just infidelity. It was an existential rupture. But under cross-examination, Dr. Keene was cornered. Would a man in a dissociative episode calmly walk down a hallway, select a medical instrument, and carry out a killing in silence? Dr. Keene paused. It's possible, he said, but unlikely. The courtroom murmured. Nathan's brother testified next. He tried to humanize Nathan, describe a childhood full of pressure, a father who preached purity and legacy every Sunday morning and beat it into them every Saturday night. He was broken, the brother said. Our dad raised us to believe that if your wife cheated, it was like she'd spit in your blood. But ADA Torres turned the brother's word against him. Did Nathan ever say what he'd do if Emily cheated? The brother hesitated. Yes. He said he'd never raise another man's child. And if she ever did that to him, she'd regret it. Then came the final testimony, Meredith herself. She took the stand holding Elijah in her lap. The courtroom hushed. I didn't know about the affair, she said plainly. Emily didn't tell anyone. She was ashamed. She didn't want to hurt Nathan. She thought she could survive the truth if she just held on long enough. And what happened when the truth came out? The prosecutor asked. Meredith looked straight at Nathan. Her voice never wavered. He killed her before she even got to hold her baby a second time. The final day of the trial came quickly. The jury looked exhausted. The gallery was full, some people standing against the back wall, reporters scribbling notes like the outcome would shift public opinion more than facts ever could. Ada Torres delivered her closing statement like a funeral eulogy. This case isn't about paternity. It's not about betrayal. It's about control. Nathan Cartwright believed that if his wife defied him, if she brought a child into the world that didn't carry his blood, her life was no longer worth sparing. She held up a photograph of Emily, smiling, pregnant, unaware. She was human, flawed, but she deserved to live. Her son deserved to have a mother. And the man who took that away made a choice. Not a mistake, not a moment of weakness, a choice. The defense tried to push the emotional breakdown theory one last time. LeMay's voice cracked as he described a man driven to madness by betrayal. But by then, no one in that room believed Nathan had lost his mind. He had known exactly what he was doing. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreperson stood with steady hands. We, the jury, find the defendant, Nathan Thomas Cartwright, guilty of first-degree murder. Nathan didn't react. He stood, nodded once, and sat back down. As the judge read out the sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole, a baby began to cry in the gallery. Elijah. The courtroom froze. For a brief, surreal second, it was as if the child had spoken the verdict himself. Meredith lifted him up, whispered something into his ear, and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. Outside, it had started to snow. Quietly, gently, as if the world was trying to cover something awful with a thin white sheet. Winter came early to Vermont that year. The day after the verdict, snow blanketed Brattleboro like a quiet apology, thick, white, erasing the lines that had divided sidewalks, driveways, front porches, and people. For a brief moment, the town looked peaceful again. But under the snow, nothing had really changed. The courthouse lights still burned late into the evening as staff filed final paperwork. Nathan Cartwright had already been transferred to the state penitentiary in Windsor. No cameras, no reporters, no final words. He didn't ask for an appeal. He didn't speak at sentencing. Not a single ounce of remorse passed his lips. But everyone else was still talking. In diners, churches, podcasts, and state senate hearings. The case became a national post-mortem of masculinity, marriage, and race in America. The term Cartwright syndrome started circulating among think pieces, a label for men who saw a partner's autonomy or perceived disloyalty as an existential threat. Some praised the sentencing as justice done. Others called it another sign of the country's moral decay. But for Meredith, none of that mattered. Justice couldn't bring Emily back, and it couldn't change the fact that Elijah, just 6 months old, would grow up never knowing the warmth of his mother's voice or the feel of her skin against his cheek. At night, Meredith would sit in the old nursery and rock him to sleep in the same chair Emily had painted pale blue. She sang the same lullabies Emily used to hum while folding laundry, brushing her teeth, or staring out the window into a yard that now lay quiet under snow. Sometimes Elijah would reach out, as if grabbing at something unseen. A mobile, a memory, a ghost. Meredith began collecting pieces of Emily's life, not just for herself, but for the boy who would one day ask questions. She printed photos from Emily's phone, selfies in the garden, blurry classroom shots, a picture of the two sisters smiling over Thanksgiving pie. She kept the letters Emily had written but never sent. She even tracked down Marcus again, not to ask for anything, but to offer a connection. A bridge, something better than silence. They agreed to take it slow. Marcus visited once a month. At first, Elijah cried when Marcus held him, but eventually he stopped. One day, he even fell asleep on his father's chest. That was the day Marcus cried for the first time, quietly, into the boy's hair. On Elijah's first birthday, Meredith lit a single candle in the living room and placed it in a cupcake. No party, no balloons, just her, Elijah, and a framed photo of Emily on the mantel. She whispered, "You were so wanted, little man. You are still wanted." Later that night, after Elijah had fallen asleep, she opened the journal again. Emily's journal. The last entry had been written a week before her death. It read, "If I die in childbirth, tell him I was scared but ready. If I live, I'll never lie to him again. Either way, he deserves the truth." Meredith closed the book and cried until her chest ached. That winter, the state of Vermont passed legislation requiring all maternity wards to install panic buttons directly in postpartum rooms. The Emily's Law, as it came to be called, was signed quietly but with bipartisan support. No press conference, just a quiet memo and a promise that what happened in room 308 would never happen again. But the people of Brattleboro still walked with a limp. Some left the church. Others left town. A few tried to pretend the whole thing had never happened. But not the children. Emily's former students, now a little older, a little wiser, started asking questions their parents weren't ready to answer. Why did someone hurt Miss Emily? Where did her baby go? Is he safe? One of her students, a quiet girl named Rosie, brought a drawing to Meredith's house that spring. It showed a woman with yellow hair holding hands with a baby under a giant heart. On the back, in shaky letters, she had written, "She still loves him from heaven." Meredith taped it to the nursery wall. As Elijah learned to walk, talk, and climb up into his aunt's bed at 6 a.m. asking for Nana pancakes, the town slowly began to unthaw. Not forgive, not forget, just unthaw. And then, one day in early summer, Meredith drove Elijah to the cemetery. It was a bright morning, and the boy wore a blue button-up shirt, his curls sticking out in every direction. He held a small bouquet of daisies in his fist. They stood in front of Emily's grave for a long time. Meredith knelt beside him and whispered, "This is your mama." Elijah stared at the stone for a moment. Then, without being told, he toddled forward and placed the daisies against the marble. He didn't cry. He didn't understand. But somewhere inside, he knew that this place mattered, that something had been lost here. And maybe, someday, he'd understand what it meant to love someone enough to forgive them, even if the world didn't, even if it never could. In the months that followed, Meredith started a foundation in Emily's name, the 308 Project, aimed at supporting women in abusive relationships, especially those caught in the complex intersections of race, religion, and reproductive trauma. The first scholarship went to a young biracial teen who wanted to become a doula. The house on Pine Street was eventually sold, the nursery painted over, but Meredith kept the rocking chair. It now sat in a new room, in a smaller house, filled with laughter, toys, and life. And Elijah? He grew into his mother's smile, into his father's eyes, into the truth that had cost one woman her life, and gave another woman a reason to fight for his.